Thank you, Georgia. Thank you very much for having invited me to this very interesting symposium. I'm very happy to be here, to be linked to my university, because also I'm from Ca' Foscari as well, and to see here, even if by video, all very good friends. I want also to thank you, Mr. Mamia, for the very kind words that he say to me, for having participating to the promotion about Japanese food for the consulate. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here to talk about media and storytelling just after the first panel, in which you explained, in which there were many panelists talking about market. So here is like a link between also market and culture, which is very important for the promoting of any products, the Japanese food in Italy, as well as Italian food in Japan. And the link between market and culture is the power of storytelling. As Georgia said, I am a journalist. I am specialized on Japanese issue. I write about Japanese lifestyle and society and culture, mainly for the Italian magazines, and also for a Japanese English, but in English, website, the Japan Forward, which is the English page for Sankei Shimbun. I would like to talk about the power of storytelling, and how did I develop also a series of books about Japanese food and Japanese food culture. And I would like to start to tell you, to recount you how did the genesis of the first book comes out, just because understanding that we can understand the knowledge of Japanese food by the general readers, because out of this, I mean, there is a very large public that still doesn't know anything almost about Japan. When when I think about, even as a journalist and as well as a writer, to write something, I have to take in mind, even with my publisher, my target. The target in this case is the general reader, and to be able to reach the general readers is very important, because the only way that we can have to enlarge our market. So the first book that I published is this one. Is inside this box. This is a box that has been published by Feltrinelli Real Cinema, who is the section of Feltrinelli. Feltrinelli is my publisher, editing company, in 2013, when it was released in Italy, the documentary movie about Jiro Ono. Jiro Ono is the most famous Itamai in the world. He gained the 3 Michelin stars in 2008, and then in 2013, then there was David Gelb, an American, and I say always an American, made the documentary movie, not any European, on Jiro Ono, about his life, and then it arrived in Italy. Since this box comes out with a book, always, not only this one, the format is together with a book, which is, sorry, this one. I was asked by Feltrinelli to curate this book. So what could we do at that time? It was 2013. In 2013, since there was a question when the wave of Japanese food, of Japanese became broken up, is, as everybody, another person said, is a relatively recent phenomenon. Still, the ethnic wave, the wave of the ethnic food was not so, has not broken up. We were in the way of being interested in all these ethnic food. You know that in Italy we are very conservative in food. We like very much our tradition, and we put many resistances to come entering new restaurants of new foods in Italy. But Expo was approaching and things were changing. There were much more events and exposure of food culture from all over the world. And so Feltrinelli decided to do this. In the meanwhile, we had another boom coming out because sushi was, of course, the biggest wave, the window through which the Japanese food arrived in Italy. And in the previous years, before this one was published, we had a boom of restaurant, wok restaurant managed mainly by Chinese. Sushi became very popular in big cities since we used to have a joke here in Milan, and we say that sushi was like a Milanese food. It was so popular here that we say things like this, but sushi, as I wrote already in a book, has been a very eaten, a very famous food, but very unknown. At that time, Asia food was a very big block and there was no distinction. It was very hard to understand the differences between Chinese food and Japanese food, the borders, and also these Chinese that were making sushi. So people were very confused. Of course, sushi is very delicious and people like very much to eat sushi. But what is sushi? And almost nobody knew. And for example, then what we do if we do not explain things? We have a lot of misunderstandings. A misunderstanding is due to the fact of, and I always say this, the popularity of sushi is due to these misunderstandings too, not only because it's delicious, because sushi is a very clear shape, which seems to be simple. So we thought, as a Western gaze and a Western way of thinking, that of course it was a very simple recipe. So it happens that magazines ask me to write sushi recipe for the articles, something that of course it was not possible to do, because sushi is a dish, is a plate, but it's not a recipe. Very simple, at least. And when I was asked to write this, of course, my editor said, okay, let's translate Jiro Ono's recipes. But what happens? Of course, I looked for that, but it was not possible to find that because Jiro Ono has never written a recipe book. Then he later wrote a book published by my editor, who is this one. And of course, it took one book, entire book, for one only recipe, the recipe of sushi. And inside, of course, more than a recipe, there are a compendium of ingredients and techniques and aesthetics. Because sushi is like everything in Japan. If we don't have a very good aesthetics, it cannot be said that it's a Japanese food. I always say that people can learn how to put rice and fish together, but to make sushi is something different. Anyway, all of this brought me to this enlightenment. To talk about sushi, to write about sushi, we have to make a step back. We could not start from the recipe. Recipe comes only at the end of the work of all this knowledge that brought you to understand what, for example, sushi, but any other food, especially Japanese food, because it is very far away and use very different ingredients and techniques, can be narrated, can be told, can be written. So I presented to my editor an editorial plan in which we could create like a frame, like a path to make readers understand what sushi is. So we created, I asked to some friends to help me in this process, and also Pio D'Emilia and Michio Yamada and other people. Also, I collaborated with Nicolo Geri, that he is going to speak later about the history of sushi. Because, for example, at that time, it was almost impossible to find any Italian publication that recounts the history of this very famous dish. So the first book was created, and there is no recipe. It's only essays about sushi. But in doing this, of course, I understand also another things, that food could be a medium, a tool that we can use to make people understand, to enter another culture. Because at that time, but even still now, and in this, I want to answer a little bit to the guy that asked what's for the South, the promotion of food. It's true that even if in the cities, in the big cities now, we have make a step forward in the knowledge of Japanese food, this is not true for provinces, small cities, and somehow some South areas. Okay, so the level is not the same everywhere. So then in 2013, as Georgia said before, Japanese government pushed a lot, make a lot of investments to promote Japanese food in Italy. We were plenty of events about Japanese food almost in the years before Expo. We almost every prefecture, Japanese prefecture, big cities arrived here to promote their products, their peculiarities, their geography, and their ingredients, and all the particularities. Travel and food were linked very much because Japan was pushing with the soft power, putting together, of course, food and travel and markets, all these things. And we arrived at Expo. Expo is not the starting point of this process, is the last point of this process, because during Expo, we catalyzed, we summarized all the efforts that has been done in the years before. And the success of the pavilion, that has been the second more visited in Expo after the Italian one, is the summa of all this process. There's all this promotion that the Japanese government and also we as a writer have done at that period. So in that year, I asked my editor, I proposed my editor to make another effort to bring this little book out of the box to become a revised and enlarged book, explaining also this time sushi, so taking sushi to again as a tool, as a medium to explain Japanese culture, which means that we treated, because I was not alone, I was the curator, I created the editorial project, I wrote a part of this book and asked to scholars and experts like Nicolo Geri, like Paola Scolavrezza, who wrote a very beautiful essays on relationship between sushi and literature, for example, and also the beloved Stefano Carrero, who disappeared last year, unfortunately, about the relationship between economy and sushi. I still want to remind you that at time, Italian readers still thought that sushi was the only and the most eaten food of Japan, that people was going to eat sushi almost every day. And the essay of Stefano Carrero is very funny to read. It was like when the Japanese people thought that Italians was eating only pasta. It was the same level of knowledge. So this book was made only by essays because we needed to make people understand what really sushi was. In doing this, you know, each time that we do this process as writers, we have in mind the target. Who is our target? If the target, since books, now I want to point out that since books are products that has to be sold and has to be read, we must be able to analyze markets in two ways. One, to publish, to choose issues that are of interest for the markets. Second, we must be able to anticipate somehow what are the needs of the readers, which is something that we always do also when I write as a journalist, since journalism is based on current affairs, you know, and then this was the process. And the third book that I wrote, just very easily to say, was this one that at the end has some recipe inside. And so you can say, well, then you betrayed what you have said till now. Why you have wrote something with a sushi recipe? I always says that my book doesn't teach people on how to cook things, but on how to eat. Because it's very important to understand how to eat and to know what we are eating. First, it becomes more delicious. And second, to understand the techniques and the ingredients make you understand better what you have in front of you, the dish. So when I collaborated to Poporoi, I was required for this book. I was required to write this. Of course, I knew that nobody reading this book, nobody reading any book of sushi is able to become an itamai. But if we try to do things, we can start to know ingredients, new techniques, to understand how difficult it is to make sushi. Experience, of course, is another way of storytelling. But that we have to understand is that it's not enough. That's why also in this book and in all the books, I create something like a formative, we can say, in which the recipe arrives at the end of the process, not the beginning of the process. Especially if we if we talk about a culture very different from ours, that use technique very different from ours, and ingredients that are very different from what we use every day. We have to learn, we have to study first, and then we can approach the technique, you know. But I think that it is anyway a very good step if at least we understand what we are eating and how to eat. Because, for example, for sushi, if we don't know the right temperature at which temperature has to have the sushi, for example, we think that the sushi can be eaten like cold. Well, that's a mistake, because it's not true. Sushi must be eaten at 37, almost a little bit warm. If it is not warm, that's not sushi. If it doesn't have a very good aesthetic, that's not sushi. And all the process that the itamai brings to arrive to become itamai, you know that the trainee program of every itamai is very long. So first of all, since we have very much respect, for example, of every process, for example, to make wine, making Brunello wine is very difficult stuff. We have to pay respect of people that pay his life to become a chef on sushi and became, for example, itamai. The people that study to become itamai, and the way in which they learn to do that, and I wrote in my book, the master chef, the itamai never explains, must be seen and proceed, and the technique, the way in which they do things is a very Japanese way, is a kata, we can say. It's very important to grasp the Japanese feelings that is behind every dish. It is true also for the ramen, and also for the sake, and also for the other things. So if we don't have this frame in mind, we cannot understand much of what we are eating, or how we can promote, how we can talk about any dish. So after this book, for example, I wrote about, I want now to tell you on the editorial plan of writing for general readers to enlarge the knowledge of, of Japanese food culture in Italy. I wrote this book, which is Il Libro del Ramen. It has been published in 2017. It has been sold in 3 months, has been printed for the second time. In this case, we made a very nice operation because we were able to understand the market before the ramen boom has started. This is what must be done by writing books that has been read, you know. And but if we talk to general readers, which kind of storytelling can we use? The style is very important. So we must be able to give information, specific information, in a very simple way, very clear way that even people that has never been in Japan can understand, and comparing sometimes to Italian or Western way of thinking. And that can be easier for them to grasp, and that can be curious also for them, because to create curiosity is the only way that we have to make people be interested in something that doesn't know, because it's it's not easy, but it's easier to talk to people that knows, you know, some topics. But for people that is not interested, is more difficult to reach them, to make them curious about something that they don't know, and that maybe sometimes they don't want to know. So I, of course, do many things. I write about curiosity, about museums, of course, always taking the food as a medium for telling, for writing about Japanese culture. And also I had the idea to create the chronological table that could compare Italian Western history to Japanese history, to make understand the development of ramen. And of course, bringing the reader from the genesis of ramen, coming from China, and answering always for what I think are questions that we always must have in mind when we write. We have always to have in mind something when we write, a question that we have to answer. In this case, in the case of ramen, I answered why why the Japanese ramen became famous in the world instead of the Chinese ramen. Second, what is the difference between the Chinese and the Japanese ramen? Because it is something that people are very confused too. Second, what are the traditional ramen of Japan? Because only knowing that, we can go then explaining the new versions of ramen that, of course, is in the book. I mean, the creative side of ramen. For example, I collaborate with Luca Catalfamo of Casa Ramen that create the Italian ramen. But to arrive to explain Italian ramen, we must know the background. Why storytelling is important? It's important because if we think that the experience is enough to grasp, to understand informations, we follow again in misunderstandings. That's what happened. I'm out of time. No, yes. Still I have time?
Yeah, you still have 5 minutes. You can take your time.
I just want to make the example of sake. This is the book of sake. And since there was a guy before that asked about beer, sake suffered a big misunderstanding that create problems in the promotion This is why I think that the storytelling is a key point that link market to culture. Without storytelling, without promoting in the right way any product, we can follow in misunderstandings. I think that you know that for many years, people are taught in Italy, maybe not only in Italy, that sake was like a grappa. I still remember in 2015, during the expo, I was invited to a dinner, and I seated near to the editor-in-chief of a very famous magazine. So we were talking about sake and Japanese culture, and he said, "Oh yes, sake is a distillate, is a spirit." You know, so we have to clarify things, and to do that, I wrote a book that, starting from explaining the kanji of sake, brought people to understand that yes, in Japan we have spirits, but that is not sake. So sake, I explained, of course, the process to make people understand that it's not a distillate, but has a gradation that is between 14 and 17 degrees. And also to make them seem that there are shochu that are like grappa. So I took the chance also to open the storytelling of the spirits, and also trying to clarify sake itself, and bringing sake as the king of the Japanese liquor to enter the world, the whole world of Japanese spirits, because there is a market which is very prosperous here in Italy, which is the market of what is called samurai spirit, for example, whiskey, gin, rum, made in Japan, that is very famous for the cocktails, but nobody knows. I mean, only people that works in the section knows, and nobody tells about that. But it's a big market because, for example, Japanese whiskey as well as beer, for example, are very famous. And it's a slice of market that must be told, that, about which we have to write about. This is why I choose not to since at the end of the book I always write receipts and collaborate with restaurants, or I decided not to make what people was waiting for me. I mean, to make the food pairing between Italian food and sake. No, I decide to tell, to put in the book the cocktails. So I was able to use to make people understand how the Japanese liquor family, so gin, and also to introduce them to others very that are very used for making also sweets like umeshu or yuzushu or shochu are used for cocktails. And also, what is interesting is that I interviewed Michito Kaneko, who gained the World Bartender Prize in 2015. And also, because I choose these things also because sometimes I find that the promotion by Japanese food company are sometimes very traditional, and I wanted to market, younger people. And anyway, now I finish, otherwise I can continue for another half an hour to talk about all these stuffs. Now, what I want to say is that storytelling is a very key point for promoting any product. We have to put strength, and we have really to concentrate a lot on communication, which is very important, especially in this period that in which we had to start all our promotion activities. And when we will restart to live our lives in a more normal way, we will have to maintain the market position and to regain the ones that we have lost. And communication will be, and a strong storytelling, a right storytelling will be a very important key for the market. So even in Japan and even in Italy, since I think that sometimes we lack faith in storytelling, things that the French doesn't do. I advise everybody that wants to, also enlarge the market, to think about communication and the power of storytelling in the globalized market.